Okay, welcome everyone to the Catalyst Circle and Community Governance Oversight Working Group on prioritised problems. And we have Allison, Nadia and Tevo, and I'll just jump into a screen share if I can find, oh, here we go. And we just go straight into the prioritised problems board. Might take a while to come up. Can you see that?
Yep, I can see it now.
Okay, so this is the working group meeting 2. Now, to recap for anyone not familiar what we did in the first meeting, which I'll go back to in a minute, is that we looked at the question of how to do problem sensing from scratch. Like what is a problem? What is an issue? How do you get to raise a problem on the prioritized problem board? And we looked at something called the problem sensing rubric and did some work around that. And I'd like to sort of like on the agenda to sort of like revisit that a little bit, sort of ask this question, is it sufficient, the minimum that we got to move forward in this workshop to look at how to apply that problem sensing rubric to structure the prioritized problems process. So that's really that. And to give a quick overview of last time for anyone who was there, this is what we did. We took governance as a lives rubric and fed it into a kind of a basic workflow, which which is the beginning of a refinement, where on one hand you have solutions that go towards proposals and challenge settings here, and on the other side you have solutions that are more about decisions, so about group alignment or parameter changes. And then we briefly discussed taxonomy issues like what does certain terms mean. That's another thing we discussed. Oops. And further on to that, I believe, Nadia, you applied this rubric at the last circle meeting to, I noticed, so to one of your problems, this problem here. So I just thought maybe you'd like to update us on that if you found that useful.
Yeah, I actually added, so I've used this in 4 places now, just to test it in different areas. So I added this project, I have two of them. So I added 2 of these problems to the circle prioritized problems board. So this is one of them. And I tried to do this with both and answer them within the actual details of the problem on the board, which I found very helpful because it keeps you from writing a novel, and it makes sure that what you're writing there is very succinct and directed to help people understand what they're looking at. We're also testing out DWork, so I added to the only DWork, well, I'll try to use the same term. So the only DWork prioritized problem that we have is that we're putting the initiative subcircle together to go through the log and refine it so it can be actually addressed. I use it there. And then the circle is having the conversation around this forming the code of conduct. And so as a basic framing for the conversation, like not to create the thing, but to frame the conversation and help us to know how to contribute to it in a decentralized community. We use that as sort of a starting point for the conversation. So I have found that it both helps an individual frame, and also it helps to direct a conversation when you have a problem that might not be very well defined. So I found it very helpful.
Yeah, here's the example. I think this is what you used here for the code of conduct, which was, so I added it here for your updates for the code of conduct from Slack there. But yeah, so underneath that issue. Allison.
Yeah, apologies that I missed this, but what is it DWork or VWork? I don't know what that is.
Yeah, DWork is a tool that creates sort of a it feeds into GitHub, and it also integrates with Discord. For the CAVCA group, it's a group that heavily uses those channels. So when you create an issue within it, it looks very much like GitHub. It will populate Discord with a channel to be able to talk about the issue, so that people can sort of keep their commentary linked to an actual thing that's being solved. And then that will also populate into GitHub to keep that repository updated and archived. In this sense, it's not a perfect thing, but we're just starting to test it out. So we tried to use it with that tool as well.
Yeah, let's see.
It has some amount of automation, Allison. So when you create a project here, it automatically built. Yeah, so here's one. So we just did this. If you can open that one there, Stephen, the initiative subcircle.
Which one? That one, or
go back to where you were. Yeah, there. See how you have open tasks. That's not it.
This is the public board, Nadia, so everything may be on here. So
that's true. Yeah. Mine is under the mine is under the yeah. Okay, go back to here. See underneath open tasks, the initiative subcircle needs to refine F8 issues log.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is under the operations working group. So I have to finish this out still, but this is the beginning. And then we have subtasks under there. What we did learn is that it will populate pretty much, it doesn't do updates well to the initial post. So we need to have this pretty much intact before we create the thing, because that's what's going to go into GitHub. So we have some refining to do still, but you can create subtasks here with dates, Allison, as you see here. So it's a little bit of a project management tool as well. And we're just going to test it out for this very specific task, because it has a 10 to 14 day timeline. So we'll know quickly how it works and what we need to troubleshoot for. And it's not a very broad problem to solve, because the subcircle forming is not too many people. So it should allow us to really get a good sense of just the first go of it.
But what's relevant to what we're discussing today is that you've used the problem rubric here. So you've used these best categories here. So, I mean, we're not really discussing DWork. DWork also integrates in with a wallet. It's on the Ethereum platform, isn't it? So it's not really. So you could have bounty systems for this. Also integrates in with GitHub and Discord.
Yeah.
But as you said, Nadia, there are some issues with GitHub updating issues. But,
yeah, it's not seamless.
Yeah, but so you found it useful in several areas, the rubric. So using it for issues in your subcircle, for using it for framing discussions around the code of conduct, and you've used it on a couple of problems as well, haven't you? So is this, I mean, I suppose to move forward, shall we just, I know we probably could refine this further. I mean, because Tevo, we did some work on this last week, didn't we? So, but is this just okay? We use this minimum, which is basically these 3 questions here, and just say, okay, that's enough to move on with, and then just use this meeting to go on to the actual prioritized problems process itself, and then to see how the rubric applies to that.
I think it's strong. One thing I will say is I think maybe we could, like this third, I don't know if this is possible, but can you articulate the gap between the current state and the expected or envisioned state?
Yeah. You think that needs more expansion? Expansion. Yeah.
No, I think what I was just going to say there, articulate the gap, like maybe we could say like describe the difference, or I just think what it's asking for there literally is, can you talk about what my sense is, can you compare now to then?
Yeah, as is, as, and to be, basically.
Yeah.
Between now, yeah, I suppose from a plain English point of view. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just saying, could be maybe like a little less.
Okay, yeah, because I forgot that's the part of what we're doing here is to, and that meets the Voltaire principles actually of transparency of governance processes, and transparency of governance processes also means that it can be understood easily. So
Right.
yeah, and that does sound like jargon. So maybe we should revisit that description and then reword it. That's something we could do as well. I mean, that's obviously clearer. And then why is this problem important? I mean, that's quite clear already, isn't it? You're gone.
Can I just suggest that maybe we say between now and the future state? Then seems a little, just still a little vague.
Oh yeah, the previous.
Or it could be like between the current state and the envisioned state, could be like that too, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's keeping it as what's the minimum we can get away with, I suppose, and also think of it as think of this from someone who doesn't know what we're talking about at all. Okay, so it needs,
which I feel like might be me at the moment.
Yeah, no, but it's kind of like, yeah, I suppose that's if you came along. And also, even the term problem statement rubric is a bit, like what is a rubric and all that kind of thing. That could be like an issue as well. So it's really like how we structure. I mean, how we describe the rubric itself. Okay, as well. So, I mean, what should we call the rubric? That's another thing. I mean, it's not, because that's not accessible in itself, so. Are you?
I agree. I think rubric, a few times people have been like, what's a rubric? Is it a Rubik's Cube? Is it a puzzle? So it kind of was one of those words that sounds complicated, that isn't. So all we're saying is like
questions.
Is it like
encapsulating questions?
I mean, essentially it's problem statement and solution, isn't it? Or I mean,
it'd be nice if people could say quickly, like, did you run it through the blah, blah, blah process? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Blah, 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 something simple.
Okay. I mean,
expressing the problem.
The sausage making process.
It's like I've been using the word framing a lot recently, but when it came to the code of conduct, because what you want to do with the code of conduct thing is give people total space to be the contributors and drafters, but also not give you so much space that there's no way to work together. So you're framing it a little bit, and where you're like designing it, but it's not really design. You're trying to say what it is that you're to express your problem to this point. So
yeah,
it's the scaffolding that allows for the construction of the building, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got some scaffolding is still a bit associated with particular cultures. I think not everyone would know what scaffolding means. Framing, yeah, I mean, we don't. It's something to think about. I don't really. Is that the reaction you're getting, Nadia? It's like, what is a rubric? Or
yes.
Okay.
It's kind of like strategic planning. It's like for people who do strategic planning, that says something very specific. But for people who do, it's one of those words that is sort of it has a definition, but it also has sort of a broader understanding that might not be the same. I'm looking at the definition of rubric. Oh, see, rubric says a heading on a document here is this definition.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is kind of what we're doing.
What do you think, Allison? You think it's still like a scaffolding or framing or?
And actually, I'm looking at the whole sentence, and where does the problem sensing rubric end and the prioritized problem process begin? I mean, one is really the scaffolding or the framework for the other, right? That's what we're constructing here.
Yeah, I mean, to recap, it's answering those 3 questions. So I probably should have numbered them actually rather than bullet pointed them. So maybe.
Wait, are there 4?
I thought they're 3. It's not, but or 3 basic. How do you put it in here? The
3 is better.
3 is better. 3 is less, definitely. No, what I meant was, yeah.
I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah, so minimalist,
3
you
is
know.
less.
So what I meant was,
4.
there's 3 things to address, high-level questions to address, like why is this problem, why is solving this problem important to the mission of Project Catalyst? Okay, I think that's quite a simple thing to say. Yeah, so we could just, that's quite okay. I mean, we had some discussion just now on making that more plain English. So the gap between now and the previous state, something like that. Okay, so of the, I don't know, that's a bit vague, as you say, Allison. So that could be like the gap between now, I don't know, maybe it should be the other way around. The gap between the problem as we find it and where we want to go is another way we could put it, you know. And the reason why you need to articulate that is it kind of, and I think we discussed this last time, it kind of forces you to structure a solution. You know, so because you're asking yourself, okay, what is the problem now? Where do you want to go? So that kind of forces the issue of a solution. Yeah, and then
So maybe. Oh, sorry.
Finally, yeah, go on. No, go on. I want to capture what you think there. Go on. Maybe, Allison.
Maybe rather than talking about a rubric, it's how does answering the 3 main problem sensing questions structure the prioritized problem process? Because if the rubric is those questions, or is it more than those questions?
How does that structure the problem?
The process.
The process and the problem. Okay, the process. Yeah, let's start with that.
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah,
both.
yeah.
Right. How does answering the 3 main questions structure both the problem, defining the problem, and working on this problem solving process? Now that's not simpler.
No, I know structure. I'm just trying to capture that. Structure. You're right. It's about structuring the process and define the problem. Because last week we discussed this in the concept and in the context of defining problems, right? Nadia, Tevo, the kind of like we looked at problems, and then back here, and then we took the rubric and saw how that could go into defining a problem. But what we need to move, and you've done that, Nadia, with some problems and also, as you said, framing discussions about the code of conduct, and you've also done it with issues within your subcircle in terms of DWork. Mm-hmm. But where we are now is, okay, we've done that. How does that structure the process? You see what I mean? So it's like, I mean, that's not an easy question to jump into straight away, but do you have any further thoughts on that, Allison?
The process is the defining. So I'm looking at like definition. I'm just looking for words right now. So yeah, definition, sure. Statement of the meaning of the word, group, sign, or symbol. Statement expressing the essential nature of something. Product of defining. Demarcation of outlines or limits. An act of determining. It's sort of like there's a mini process or a sub process within prioritized problem solution that is, we have to go through the work of saying what it is that's wrong and saying what it is that doing something about it will achieve. So we're not just defining the problem, we're defining the solution and the outcome state of that thing, just because it's not fun to define a problem, really. And not that this needs to be fun, but it shouldn't be intimidating. Like, we're writing what's wrong, and then we're writing what we think. We're not even writing what we're going to do about it. We're just writing what it will be like on the other side once we solve this thing. So we're not defining the strategy that we're going to use. We're just saying, here's what we see, and here's what we see it could be like, and somehow we're trying to get over there. And that's our sub process within the whole problem solving.
And what you just said is like, it kind of, it brought to mind, I mean, what we're talking about in terms of structure. If you think of how we have a problem and we move it across the board, and I suppose what we, in terms of definition, in terms of structuring the process, it's more the common things that every problem shares. Okay, so and every problem should share as it moves across the board. This is what I think we seem to be implying. It should share these qualities of like, why is it important? Is its importance to the mission? You know, it should capture that. It should capture the gap. I know I'm just abbreviating here. Okay, you know, we know what I mean by the gap and the solution. And apply some metrics. Okay, and then the value. Okay, so the value is a kind of, could be like arguably quantitative or qualitative. I'm trying not to be too exclusive of, you know, more qualitative solutions possibly, you know.
Make problems more readable.
Yeah, so there's a kind of, that isn't just defining the problem, you know, it's not just the rubric, it's how, okay, we have that rubric, problem's gone through the rubric, or the what we call the rubric, something simple, and then we're framing it somehow. It's having in common with every other problem, and that what that is capturing these things here somehow. And does this do that? You know, here you are. When you say you're solving, this is like a statement. Is this something that needs to be updated as you go, as this goes along the board? That's what I mean, I suppose. Does this need to be more structured here? You know, like, do you need to have like the current, you need to explicitly state the current state is X, Y, Z, where we want to go with is A, B, C. Do you see what I mean? You know, and then here's your, here you hit, but here, this seems to be, this section seems to be about quantification and measurement, doesn't it? So that you've said here how we're going to quantify the solution. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's an important well, here's the thing about that part. That's just what if a group worked on it together, you would probably have a diverse thing. And it's sort of important also, I hate to get too ethereal, but it's important that multiple people think about that part, because once you give those measurements start to direct how you think about it. Whereas they might totally not be the right measurements. They're just ideas for the beginning. So I think you're right that it does need to be fluid. Number or impact of issues raised that root in the proposal process, but impact the CA and BCA process. I mean, if there's one and it's really big, or there's 300 and they're really small, the impact might be the same. So the number is not really the thing to measure there. Anyway, I'm just saying how we define this stuff. Improvements to the proposal process and guidelines to fund. So we could look at a before and after of the proposal process, Fund 8 to Fund 9, and that would tell you a little bit about how you've measured the changes. So these are things that we might do, but this process really, the better that you do this, I think the more rich the actual solving. And maybe it should be that one of the first things that a group does in working on something is to go through this process, so that there's a real collective understanding of the pain points, the opportunities, and the things that need to be considered, so nothing's left out.
Yeah.
So do the metrics, is it required to put the metrics in at this stage of the process?
Well, I think that's what you're partly. well, that's up to us to decide as we're here now. I think there's the question of, and I think I noticed how you qualified it, could quantify. Okay. Because I think what you're getting from what you're saying, Nadia, is that maybe we shouldn't set that in stone immediately. Okay. Yeah. So maybe we need to think about what needs to quantify, of course, but the first thing needs to be this, possibly. Is that what we're coming to? That's why I put that there. First of all, we need to say, is the articulation of the states, because that is that fluid?
Yeah. I totally agree. I think that should be the first question.
Yeah. So that has, and then Allison, only when we're clear about, I suppose, a problem statement. Maybe that's what we could call it, where we are at the moment, and we're clear, or we have a clear, obviously things change, but a clear vision or plan of where we want to go. Okay. Once we've decided that, only then can we begin to talk about value in terms of quantification and measurement.
Yeah, but what I was saying was, is the rubric, for lack of a better word, defining the minimum amount of information that needs to be drafted in order to start the process for the problem to go onto the prioritized problem board?
Yep.
And could it be that the metrics are then added at a later stage as the card moves across the board?
Yeah, but if you force it at the start, you will kind of create hypothesis, and that's also something useful, because then you can fail or exceed, and on the way find out that, okay, these measurements do not work.
Yeah, I think again,
I think it was more helpful than it was harmful, but I'm also at the beginning of the process with this. But I do think as long as we say, we'll learn from going through the process. It might not be these things, but here's some ideas. They're not written in stone. I think it's more helpful if you look at it that way than if you don't do that exercise.
I mean, returning back to that minimum amount of information point you're making, because there is something else here. Because yesterday I was in a meeting with Circle Admin. We were talking about a closing report for Circle version 2, funny enough, Allison, and sort of like, so they were talking about, well, how do you capture the achievements of a circle, and this so it's like, what have we have to answer the question of what have the circle reps achieved, and that the way that you quantify that is looking at the problem part of the way. I mean, I said that there's two things. There's a kind of qualitative thing and a quantitative thing. There is the problems on the board that the circle members are put on the board. And that's why the metrics, I suppose, or some kind of metrics are important, because that would feed into reporting, as against the qualitative state, which are more, more like, oh, I reached out to the community, and those kind of qualitative aspects to it. So it does that minimum.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
This is a complete aside, but I really wish some sort of training like this had been one of the first things we did as circle members. It would have helped me understand the whole process, what we were doing on the circle a lot better.
That's what you get for being in so early.
It's all your fault, Allison. It should have been too early.
That's what you get for being in at the very beginning.
Yeah. But I suppose that's what we're doing here as well, because we're trying to,
still trying to figure out what we did.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out the most accessible way to. I probably should recapture what our objectives in this are. But the objectives of this whole process that we do go back to the volunteer principles, Allison. It's like those, which particularly about people being accessibility, people being able to understand what we're doing, and for also it to be efficient. So because at the moment the prioritized problems process, as it is down here, for example, is a bit wordy, and so which we need to get onto this at some point, but before we get onto this, that's where this question of the structure of a problem comes in.
These are all nice Easter spring colors we've got going on here too.
I definitely see, I almost want to say it has its roots so nicely in an established governance way of thinking. This isn't like fluffy kind of like if we were to think about it, it has such great roots. And if we simplify it a little bit, I think I hesitate to use this word, but from like a marketing perspective, people should feel it shouldn't feel like you have to write a report, you know, like if you say, can you write a report on that? That sounds like no one wants to write a report. Yeah. And I'm just saying that how it's described will really help its utilization. And I'm thinking that I like the idea that rubric is like a one-word simple thing. Rubric just doesn't have that impact of like, we know what it is. But if we could find like a 1 or 2 way thing to describe it, this is a very, very helpful process. It's not a process that you have to slog through in order to check a box. It really helps a group come together. My experience so far, I don't know if that'll be the broad experience, but my experience is this. And I think also we can build this in. So one of the things we want to create for the subcircles here is the beginning, as we start to work on some of these Fund 8 to Fund 9 issues, is okay, you guys are going to take this on in order that we can all understand what you think and what you're working on in this problem ultimately, so the community can look at it and immediately understand it. You should have this process happen and a little bit of just guides for how to approach that we all follow. So if there's 4 or 5 different subcircles working on things at the same time, if you've all followed the same thing, just like a white paper, you should be able to read like a 1-pager here that says, here's what we've done. Yeah. So it'll be nice if it'll be nice to test this out and let people see what was easy and take comments back. So I do think we have an opportunity to put this into work as far as the language around it and you know, did you find this helpful? What was helpful about it? Because then we will get some, rather than us trying to think about it, we'll get some community feedback on how people talked about it and how they used it without getting too far down the road of having something established that could use some touch-ups.
How this can be used across all reps. And in all subcircles. Okay. Now, but of course, the different subcircles are working very differently. Yeah. So the question is how this doesn't become a burden to them, how it assists them. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll just put this in here because I was trying to think of like a workflow. Okay, in terms of, okay, you come along and you've identified, however the different subgroups have identified a problem. I don't think we can, maybe we shouldn't even second guess that, Nadia. You know, it's this, that's what the subcircles do. They identify something as a problem. It's up to CA subcircle or Funded Proposer subcircle to decide that. Yeah. But once it becomes a problem, then it enters into the rubric, whatever we call it. Yeah. Yeah. And the first question is asked is that one. Why is it important to the mission of Project Catalyst?
Yeah.
Okay. And if that can't be answered, it's rejected. And then it moves on to this one. Okay.
Yeah.
And with that can just be as simple as a before and after state. Okay. So if it's something like more of a qualitative problem, it still has to have an endpoint. Stop me if people disagree with me. Yeah. Because I think that's kind of what's been stressed at each circle. It has to have an endpoint or an objective. The objective is different because it doesn't, you know. And the before is simply a statement, a statement of what is.
Yeah. Description of state kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Right now we're all tired or right now we're all overwhelmed, or right now this isn't clear, or you know, whatever those things are.
Yeah. And if you can't do that, it's rejected. Yeah. It's that kind of workflow thing coming on here. And possibly, because what you were saying, Allison, is this implied in this? If you can state a before and after, does that imply that you already can think about metrics?
No, I was saying the opposite, actually, that maybe
Okay.
it's too, that by defining metrics, you are jumping further into the solution than is warranted at this state. But that observation was prompted by Nadia's point that it's important to frame the metrics with diverse insights.
Right.
But then I rescind my point when I heard Nadia say that it was actually very helpful to have to go through that process when you were framing the problem. So yeah, I'm not sure I have a point at the end of the day.
I do think so. For example, with the one we have now, with this DWork issue that we just put on there, let me look at it here so I can actually like use the exactness of it. Initiative subcircle needs to refine the F8 issues log. So the gap between the current and expected state, which I don't have filled in there yet, but if I were just off the cuff to say it, if I can articulate the gap right now, we have so many issues that have been raised without substantiation of their actual impact and may or may not be able to be solved after. So we can't, one, complete all of them in this period of time, and two, tell what things should be the priorities based on impact.
Right.
In our expected state, we will have looked at these. In expected state, we will have looked at these and we will know what to do to go forward. So that's the expected state. And then if you took that further, I think that really leads well into it, because how might the value of solving this be quantified or measured? Number of comparison before and after, number of issues, groups involved, but they're just ideas because there's probably more. So I think it's just important to say there, in that fourth question, considering question 3, or considering the gap question, how might this be quantified? Parentheses, keep in mind you may add to or take away from this in the future, so that it's not like an official KPI in a proposal where the expectation is that someone will have addressed all of these things. We might find that they're not the things to address.
Yeah, I suppose
we can ask for hypothesis, and that is something people expect. Oh, it can be wrong and can be changed. It's not asking about measurements itself.
Yeah,
that's right.
I think because I think that's why I use the word sieve. It's like, because what we're trying to do here is also, okay, we have these subcircles. They think they have a problem. I'm not saying that that's wrong, but obviously we want some kind of sieve, if you like, or filter, where what comes to circle is something that can be framed as a problem, but in a kind of way that is not too restrictive, and that comes in to this workflow. So you have that the obvious question. Well, it may seem like an obvious question, but potentially there could be problems that don't address that one there. So if it passes that one, then it comes to this articulation. What I get from what you were saying is that the articulation of this and potentially some of this requires you to refine the problem. So it means that when you have these type of problems, we've encountered it in the past, I think in previous circles as well, where the problem turns out not to be one problem. It turns out to be like a basket of issues that probably should have been broken up, into, like, for example, my problem, I'll use my example, how to encourage, or whatever it's called, I call it a listening culture. Now that's what I'd call a very vague, thick problem. It's very, it's too general, so it doesn't really have a before and an end point. But it possibly could do if it was refined. So
yes,
if you said, like, okay, I'm going to encourage a listening environment by having an after town hall on this subject every week. Okay, and that. I mean, that sounds silly, but that would be a solution. So at the moment we don't have that. And then we're going to have that, and that's going to be the endpoint or the solution. I'll put that or solution. Let's put that as well, or solution. And that is the articulation. Once it gets part that, then it becomes to, okay, what's the value of that? You know, so I've done this. I've got this listening problem, which I'm going to say at the moment we don't have these after town halls. Afterwards, we're going to have these after town halls, and the value of that in terms of resolving the problem is this, this, and this kind of thing.
Mhm.
And that's it. And then it's a problem. And then it becomes admissible. Now, then it's allowed to go on the board.
Who's the gatekeeper for at that step?
Well, this is another good question. It can't, well, it could be like, because I mean, obviously also, I was hoping to get CC admin involvement in this work group at some point as well. So like, for example, so if you think of like Nori or Nadim, I think Nori's going to step out for a while and JP is going to step in as facilitator, because I think Nori's going to go on holiday for a while as well. But so there, but there's you could argue, well, I think it is partly a facilitation role. Okay, so the facilitator needs to know, and they would work off guidelines. It wouldn't be arbitrary. So this is what we're doing. We're kind of ex-circle reps, like old circle version 2 and the circle version 3 here, are discussing this process to give advisory to the facilitator. Nadia, you've been taking this back. You've been reporting on this as a prioritized problem to Circle, so that gives legitimacy that way. So what we decide here, I suggest, is that if we decide this, like, so the answer to the question, like, we decide a kind of guidance to facilitation, which Nadia takes back to Circle and says, this is the guidance that's been suggested. Do you agree with this, Circle? Yeah, and or Circle does consultation on that, and then you have then we come back and refine it, and then we'll adopt it.
So let me summarize to make sure I understand that correctly.
Yeah.
So we in this group would come up with guidance,
yeah,
to provide to the facilitator around when a problem would be articulated enough or in accordance with the rubric, or whatever word we come up with, that it can go on the board. And the guidance that we come up with in this group, Nadia would share with Circle V3 for them to confirm that they agree with the guidance that we put together. Oh, excuse me.
yeah.
Is that what we're saying?
I'm suggesting to yeah, as a starting point. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's going to be everything, because Tevo.
The way I assumed it starts is that when somebody has a problem to bring him, he answers only why is this solving this problem important. He explains it to circle member or somehow documents or gives them the resources, and the circle member looks at it. If it's good, he copy pastes it into the Mara board, just that one question answer. And now technically the one who created the problem pulled, and then I guess there's access problems to continue to drive this and articulate before and after, because I thought we want to get it on the board as soon as possible, in a sense, if there is a reason why it should be solved, then it already gets into first column, and it adds more columns to the Praetos board, because right now it starts with the problem itself, but with the backlog, but now it kind of covers how the backlog is created also.
Yeah, I mean, part of what you're saying there is moving on to the board, which we, so what I got from what you're saying, Tevo, is that answering this, I suppose what we're talking about is minimums. What is the minimum to get onto what's currently called the problem backlog? Yeah, and the minimum is the articulation of, well, obviously the first statement, but this as well, but not this. Yeah, but
Meaning, sorry, I couldn't tell what you were pointing to. Meaning that the metrics are not part of the required minimum to get onto the board.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if that's what Tevo was saying, but
I was saying basically the same thing, but I was only expecting the why solving this problem important to mission project to Catalyst is like the minimum to get on the board, but in order to get to the like circle backlog in for them to like pick it up, they also should add in the articulation and the hypothesis.
Yeah, my view.
That makes a lot of sense, because someone might raise something as an issue and be able to say, we need to solve this because of this.
Yeah.
But not really be the one who's intending to take it through the solution. And so I think to Tevo's point exactly, the movement across the workflow itself will allow for deeper, once something gets onto the backlog, it should at minimum have X, and then in order for it to move through, it can't come, I can't remember what's after, I think researching is after backlog. In order for it to get to researching, it needs to have answered.
It's 2 steps after.
Okay, whatever's next, I can't remember. It needs to have had these additional questions. Thank you. In order to get to problem is well defined, it needs those other 2 questions, right? So I think we could actually do it based on this process, rather than having a person as a gatekeeper to Allison's original question.
Yeah, thinking
process is the gatekeeper.
Yeah, you've got a good point there. I mean, I don't want to get too dragged into this, because in another session we could completely revise all this. Okay, so so the question with all this here, and that's why I haven't been referring to it too much, is this is the current, and for people watching, this is the current process. Okay. It's tweaked, but the feedback on this is too long. There's too many stages. The stages need to be more efficient, and also it's not coming across as understandable to a broad enough audience. So that's something to bear in mind about this. But going back to where we were talking about this because that's the problem backlog. The problem backlog is currently the beginning of where the problem goes, and what we're talking about is the minimum. Okay, the minimum to get onto the board. And I think you're making an important point here, because you can't prejudge the articulation necessarily. That's what Tevo, Nadia, and Allison seem to be saying, is that that's part of the role of circle, isn't it? So so a subcircle decides something is a problem. Okay, and then the minimum for that is that important to the mission of Project Catalyst? Well, they do think they have to articulate that. Okay, and then so they come along and they put the problem on the board, and then circle decide. Hopefully, also, I mean, do we need to say that the circle rep has to give some thought to this prior to the meeting? So if you raise a problem, you've already have the problem can be you can put the problem, say, onto the backlog board so other circle members can look at it asynchronously. Yeah, and at that point it can just be this, it can just be like we need a complaints procedure, for example, because it's important to the mission of Project Catalyst, and it's just that. Okay, but then before it gets to the meeting, you have to do this, or the rep has to do that, and then it's discussed at the meeting. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense that there are certain triggers that accomplish the next step, and that these things would merge, and it would help us also to redefine those different, I'm not going to use the right word, but the different states down there, backlog, research, well-defined, that those things can be achieved states, and that the rubric and similar tools can be built into that process so that it's not sort of the person deciding where it is, but there's actual or achievables attached to it.
Okay, so that's a kind of refinement to the workflow. Does anyone else have any comments on that? So you go from, you go from here, and then you put that's potentially on the board, out asynchronously on the board, and then but then when you come prior to a meeting, when you do a stand up, you have to do some prep about this.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
Okay, and then Circle, this guidance can be given to Circle or all circles and everyone, so everyone knows that when a new problem is discussed at the Circle, okay, this is what's discussed first of all, after the obvious one of whether it's relevant to Catalyst or not. Yeah, so that's what people. This is also about expectations, isn't it? I suppose, because so we can say to people, when people say on Twitter, what's the point of Catalyst Circle? Catalyst Circle senses problems. How does it sense problems? The problems come from the community, and they are raised because the community thinks that solving the problem is important to the mission of Project Catalyst. How is that articulated? The rep takes that and puts it on the board, and it's articulated by this before it's after statement. Yeah, which is then discussed by Circle, and then it's either accepted or rejected. Yeah.
But then again, it is the first tip you added, minimum to get on the board. Just the why statement is not true. Then
that's just to get in the board as backlog. It could be taken off, Tevo. So
in that sense,
yeah. So also that's something we need to. So when we get on to discuss the problem process, that's another feedback that we've had. I think you were familiar with this, Nadia, where there's no obvious way of taking something off the board quickly, is there? Or it seems to imply that once you have, so I think you need a kind of acceptance rejection process, don't you? Where I don't know, what do you think, Tevo? Or because it's answering your concern about airing the problem. Okay. I
think it's fine. Like if it's not brought up in the circle when it doesn't have before and after state, I guess it's fine. Because it does again show maybe it is still good enough for the circle to show, hey, here are a few new issues what we accepted from the community. They don't have before and after state, but these problems are for to be solved, and I think they're valuable. But I move on from now because there is no more information. So the circle rep doesn't have to do the work of adding the before and after, but anybody else can pretty much pick up the problem which is important to the Project Catalyst.
It's currently
guys, I have to hop off. I'm sorry, I have a 9 o'clock here, which is a different time. Tevo, I didn't get to answer your question there in the chat, but I'll start it up with you.
I was just going to say that we're at the hour, so I need to sort of I should have anticipated that. So to conclude, I mean, we're kind of refined the problem statement rubric. Thank you, Nadia, Allison, and Tevo, and we are at a point where we have a 2-stage process which we need to revisit at the next meeting to confirm that, and then go on to the prioritized problem process itself. So thank you, everyone. This is the end of the session.